glad you could join us on another conversation on Business Redefined. Now, the budget season is just lurking around us, and we want to kick our conversation on matters regarding taxation. And I receive so many questions regarding excise tax. And tonight, we are privileged to have Lindstrom Kinoti, the project manager in charge of the excisable goods management system at KRA. Welcome on set.
Thank you very much.
Karibu sana. Let's kick this off. Sometimes I really struggle with excise goods tax in the Kenyan context, because what's the policy underpinning it? The way we know excise tax from way back, it was largely a sin tax, trying to moderate consumption of certain commodities. But increasingly in Kenya, we are ramping excise on almost everything. Does that concern you?
That's a very good question. And maybe just to set context, that it's true that traditionally excise has been looked at as a sin tax, and mainly applying to alcohol products or tobacco products, or products that are deemed to cause some harm or to either the body or the environment. But over the years, then we've seen, and this is not just in Kenya alone, globally, we've seen excise growing from just being a sin tax, a tax on luxuries, to playing a major role in contributing towards revenue collection. And so if you look at the Kenyan context today, you have excise on services as well. And so we are moving away from just having an excise as a tax on sinful products to a significant contributor in the revenue collection. So today we're talking about excise contributing around 10% of revenues in Kenya, which is quite significant, because that's over 100 billion Kenyan shillings. Kenya shillings, which is quite significant amounts. And we are likely to see, not only in Kenya, globally countries are beginning to look at how do we get more revenue efficiently in a simple manner. And excise happens to be a very simple tax to collect in terms of its administration. Yes.
But don't you think then we should navigate that trade-off between the scope of excise duty on one hand and the revenue being realized on the other hand? Because, I'll give you an example. Sometimes I look at it and I wonder, isn't Kenya in contravention of some of the treaties it has engaged in, whether it's the ACFTA, Africa Continental Free Trade Area, East African Community? When you slap excise duty on potatoes from neighboring markets, what signal are we sending to our partners?
Mm-hmm. Again, just to set context again, if you look at the excise today, as it is in the Kenyan context, the number of products that are excisable are actually quite few. Because if you look at them as a group, we are not even getting probably to 30 products. They're actually less than 30 products. And so we are still not at a place where we can say excise applies across many varieties of products. And even around the policy, still the policy around excise still looks at certain elements of still ability to generate revenue, ability to deter consumption of certain goods and services. And if you look at excise from a context of regional bodies that Kenya now is part of, currently, we're looking at East African Community, for example, as an example. What is happening in East Africa is we have harmonized what we call customs duties, and mainly import duty. So as a region, we have decided and said, this is how much you are going to charge for import duty on a particular product. But when it comes to domestic taxes, and this you're talking about excise, which is our part of our conversation today, VAT, income tax, these taxes have not been harmonized within the region. And so what is happening is Kenya is free to charge excise on the products that it deems fit. So when Parliament enacts a law and says we want to charge excise on this or VAT on this, then Kenya has to do that. Same thing with Tanzania and Uganda and some of the other countries that are there. So until we get to a level where domestic taxes are harmonized within the region, then we are likely still to see countries charging very different products. So for example, in Kenya, if you find what is accessible in Kenya may not necessarily be the same product accessible in Uganda, and if you go to Tanzania, the same thing. So what we are looking at now is getting to a level where we can also harmonize some of these taxes, so that then there's uniformity in the way taxes are being charged across the region. And this will now help us, stop the many disparities you're seeing today, that certain products in Kenya are not being charged in Uganda, certain products in Uganda are not being charged in Kenya. And so this will sort it out. And so what we need to do as a country and as a region is basically to fast track the process of harmonization of domestic taxes, so that then we get to that space you're talking about. Yes.
One of the developments which I've really struggled with was excise on financial services. And why that is the case is because in a market that is still really struggling with deepening formal financial service penetration, Why add another cost element by way of excise tax?
Yes. Again, excise on financial services has been there for quite a while, at least in the Kenyan context. And it's important to just appreciate, for example, that excise is actually not a tax on business. It's a consumer tax, just like VAT. So no business bears the tax burden of excise. So what they do is that that burden of tax is pushed to you and how I were consumers. So when you're talking about businesses, either in the financial sector or businesses that operating in any other field where excise is being charged, the actual business do not bear the cost. So this is a cost that will be passed on to the consumer, and therefore does not really affect the ability of a business to make money, or the ability of a business to make revenue. And it's also important to note that when excise is charged, it's charged across the board. So for example, if it's excise on financial services, the same excise that applies to a transaction in a particular bank will be the same excise that applies in another bank, and is the same rate. So which means then there is no sector that has an advantage over the other, because it's being charged across the board. So in that sense, then excise doesn't really impact the businesses themselves.
But to counter what you're saying, and back to my point on formal financial services, because as long as you are lumping up excise tax on the formal players, the informal market and the informal financial services is also quite vibrant in this market. But the idea behind the policy Kenya has adopted is to ensure we cascade as many people from the informal into the formal. Are you then precipitating a perverse outcome when now we have excise on the formal?
Not really, because again, like we mentioned before, excise is applying on both. It's only that what sometimes we call informal, because excise is applying to all registered financial services. So whether you are a small player or a big player, excise will still apply to you. The only difference sometimes comes in the way we interpret what formal is, and sometimes what informal it means in this context. Because as long as it's a registered business offering financial services, whether it's a large corporation, whether it's a small corporation, then the same excise will still apply across the board. And so there is that fairness in terms of how it's being applied across whether the small entities, there's middle entities, and also the large entities as well. Yes.
Going back to excise tax as a mode being used to deter consumption of certain products, when you look back, would you say you actually realize the desired, because sometimes we feel like it is delivering on the revenue side, and we stopped caring about the fact that it's supposed to be deterring consumption of certain commodities. Would you say that you are actually realizing this intended objective of consumption mitigation of certain items? Yes,
and just an example, I'll give an example with tobacco products, for example. One of the reasons why excise is charged on tobacco products generally is not only revenue, just as you mentioned, it's also to discourage consumption. And as a government, and even through the other international bodies that we're partnering with, which, for example, WHO, we actually do a lot of research to find out, is the tax that has been imposed on this product discouraging consumption of an item as it should? Because one of the major objectives of excise duty is to discourage consumption of certain harmful products. And so so often then we do research to see, is this working? And in the case of tobacco products, we have actually established that additional taxes actually work as a way of discouraging consumption. And especially, again, giving the example of tobacco products, if you look at how it was worked even in the context of Kenya and many other countries that have excise on tobacco, is that it discourages what we call new entrants. People want to start smoking. So somebody probably who has already been smoking for years might not stop, because you've added 2 shillings to their favorite brand of cigarette. But for somebody who is a new entrant, who is thinking about it, and they look at the costs, they're like, I don't want to do this. And so based on the research that has been done by WHO, then it actually works as a way of discouraging. And we're looking at the same for the other industries as well, where excise is being charged for purposes of discouraging, and seeing the impact on whether it's actually working as a way of discouraging consumption of utilizing certain services that are considered to be harmful. Yes.
And that point by Lindstrom takes us to a short break. We shall be right back with a lot more on this conversation focusing on excise tax. Welcome back to this conversation on Business Redefined, where we are taking a deep dive into the subject of excise tax, and no other person better positioned to comment on this than Lindstrom Kinoti, the project manager of the Excisible Goods Management System, EGMS, at KRA. Welcome back on set.
Thank you, sir.
I spoke to a manufacturer in this market, and we were discussing the issue of the Excisible Goods Management System. But maybe before we go to that, could you just explain to us in layman terms the EGMS?
Yes, thank you. And so basically, Excisible Goods Management System is a system that was implemented by KRA around 2013. And it is among the many systems. Like we mentioned before, KRA has really looked at how do we collect revenue efficiently, in an easy manner, in a simple manner, and in a way that then we can be able to use technology to leverage on our goal for revenue collection. And so EGMS is one of the very many systems that KRA is using for this particular purpose. And so EGMS, basically what it does is a system that is being used by KRA for monitoring excise revenue. And it has several components. One of them is what we call production accounting. So it's able to tell us what a particular manufacturer is producing at any given time. And number two, it also helps us do what we call track and trace. Track and trace basically means that we are able to know that product that I found. If I go to my village where I come from and I have bought a bottle of my favorite drink, and I want to find out where did this product come from, that product will have as a stamp, and I'm sure most Kenyans have seen, the excise stamps. So these stamps are managed through that system. So I can be able to scan, and I can be able to know exactly this bottle came from which factory, when was it produced, and by whom. If it was an imported product, I can also be able to know. So it's a way of ensuring then that our consumers have visibility of which products they are taking, where they are coming from. And at the same time, then the government is also able to know what is being produced by whom and where. And also, again, as a major instrument of fighting illicit trade. Because what is happening now is the consumers are able to say this product did not come from a legitimate source, and I'm not taking it and I can reject it. Same thing with wholesalers, retailers, and people in the distribution chain can be able to say these products, we can't verify them. They are not properly stamped. So as a system for enabling fight against illicit trade, facilitate revenue collection, protect consumers, then this system is doing very well. And just to mention one additional thing, that most Kenyans may not know, is that this system has actually won KRA some global awards. And because, like we know, Kenya has been a leader in technology for many, many years, and it is actually one of the very many areas that Kenya is doing well. We've had over 40 countries coming to benchmark here in Kenya. Our own neighbors here, Uganda and Tanzania, just recently started implementation of a similar system. So it's something that, as a country, some of the things that we should be proud of, or some of the areas that we are doing well.
Let's walk back to the issue of the EGMS giving KRA visibility of the production outside here. Some manufacturers are wondering, if I'm in a market where I am dominant, I command, let's say, about 95% of the market, and KRA has full visibility of what I produce, does it really warrant EGMS being applicable to us? Because the issue is to try and weed out those illegal players. But we're in a market where we are controlling.
That's an excellent question. And if you look at what EGMS does, because other than production accounting, which is also quite critical even for people who probably command 90% of the products in the market. So one of the things that we realize is that even where you, for example, as a manufacturer, you command probably 98% of the Kenyan market, there's still an opportunity that somebody there can still try to counterfeit your products. And we've seen, KRA arresting a lot of illicit traders. It could be a small manufacturer somewhere, but that illicit manufacturer is still eating into the revenue of a legitimate trader. Number two is also we want to the consumer to have visibility of where the products they are coming from. And even in the context of industries where we have one player in the market, we realize the structure around some of these industries is that they are different. They are produced in different factories. So you find there's a factory in Eldoret, there's a factory in Nairobi, there's a factory in Nakuru, and sometimes these are franchised factories, which means they're managed by independent people. And so even from a corporate perspective, this corporate wants to have visibility of what has been produced in which factory. and are there any opportunities of somebody playing around with it? So this system then comes as an advantage, not only for KRA, but even for that manufacturer, because they can protect them from these illicit traders who want to counterfeit their product. They can also have visibility over what is being produced in each of the various plants where some of the products are being produced. And the consumers are also able to track back and say, this product came from a particular factory. So for example, if a consumer has an issue with a particular product, and they're able to trace it, and say this product came from Nairobi a plant or whichever plant, then it provides visibility, and we can be able to follow up which line that product was produced in, which particular factory it was produced in. So it really still serves as a very, very big advantage for all manufacturers, whether you occupy probably 90% or even less. And just one thing to mention is, for consumers, KRA has provided a free mobile application. You can be able to download that mobile application for free, and you can be able to use it to scan the products that you're taking and see where did they come from and who is making them. And if you have a problem, you can also be able to report through the same mobile application to KRA. So really, it's an advantage for all industries that are operating in the excise sector.
Some manufacturers have raised the complaint that when they look at the cost of the stamp vis-a-vis the cost of the product, you really ask yourself whether the cost incurred in this stamp justifies the yield being realized by KRA by way of revenue. Yes. How do you respond to that? Yes,
if you look at, for example, how stamps are costed, because, for example, the cost of an excise stamp for water is 0.5 cents. The one for soft drinks about 0.6 cents. And you look at what is the value of this stamp. And sometimes I think the challenge when we're having this conversation is that some people think, the stamp is only serving the purpose of revenue generation, which is not necessarily true. It is true. One of the reasons why what the stamp is doing is revenue generation. But look at it from a perspective of the stamp protecting you as a manufacturer from illicit trade. And we know illicit trade is a big challenge, not only in Kenya, in many other countries. And so this system is not only raising revenue for government, it's also protecting you as a manufacturer. And number three also is ensuring then that we have visibility of who is manufacturing what at any particular or given time. And look at, for example, I'll give you a very good example with alcohol. The stamp for alcohol is only for beer, for example, is only 1.5 shillings per bottle. If you look at the average probably cost of a beer bottle is probably 100 and something shillings or 200, the small bottle. Yes, which is really about 1%. So the cost is not that significant. And if you look at for spirits, it's the same thing. The cost is 2.8 shillings per stamp. But if you look at the cost, the price of a spirit, some of them will go 2,000 shillings, 5,000 shillings, even 10,000 shillings for some, depending on which brand you use. So the actual cost of a stamp is actually 0.0 something of the price of the actual product.
So you don't see it being a major problem?
No. It's not a major, for the benefit it offers Kenyans in terms of protecting them from illicit products, protecting their health, protecting legitimate industries, and even for protection of revenue. That cost is actually very, very, very minimal. I see. Yes.
One of the elephants in the room, if I could call it, yes, is the annual inflation adjustment of the excise tax. Yes. Two things here. One, it is predicated on the assumption that prices will always be on the upward trend, which, as recent developments around COVID has shown us, is not always the case. Second, it is predicated on the assumption that as a producer, I will always pass the taxation cost to the end consumer. Sometimes it's not the case because I want to remain competitive in the market. So here I am, my production costs are going up, and I'm forced by the policy on excise tax to absorb more cost because I don't want to nudge my prices up. Do you feel the philosophy behind this annual adjustment is well informed?
Again, probably just to put some context so that our viewers can understand what inflation adjustment is and probably why it's done. Inflation adjustment is only done for products that have what we call a specific duty rate. So what this means is that excise is being charged a specific amount based on either volume or quantity. An example is, for example, if we say we are charging 100 shillings per litre, which means then we are charging a standard amount of money per litre. Now what happens is, if you are charging a specific duty rate, for example, for over the last 5 years, you realize probably the price of the product 5 years ago is not necessarily the same price the product is today in 2022. And so, so policymakers have to think about how then do we ensure the taxes keep up with the prices and the inflation that is already happening in the market. And so that's the reason why then inflation adjustment is done. So that then to ensure that as the prices go up, because the inflation will always happen, then the taxes are able to keep up with the increase in prices. Now, the other question you're asking is, the added cost being passed on to the consumer, and you as a manufacturer choosing to absorb it to remain competitive. Now, one thing that we probably need to note is that when inflation adjustment, first of all, it's done based on facts. The Commissioner General can only adjust based on the figures that are provided by the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, which means these are verified figures that actually inflation actually happened. So the Commissioner General cannot do an adjustment unless inflation actually happened, and those figures have to be provided by the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. And the Commissioner General is told that the figure for inflation adjustment is probably 4% or 5%, depending on the rate, the inflation adjustment. So by the time KRA does inflation adjustment as required by the law, then there is certainty that inflation actually happened and the figure is actually standard. And so in terms of you choosing to absorb the cost, again, it's important to note that when it's done across the board. So for example, if it's a particular category of products, it will be done for, if it's spirits, for example, inflation adjustment will be done on all types of spirits. So whether it is a product produced by you or myself or that other manufacturer, then that additional excise will apply to all of us across the board. So there will be nobody who has an advantage over somebody else. Because there will be nobody who says, for me, I've added 2 shillings for you. I mean, the excise on me is an additional 2 shillings, but for the other manufacturer is probably less. So to be across the board. And excise fundamentally is a consumption tax. So if a manufacturer, for example, chooses to absorb the cost, that means they have also done their competition and realized that even without increasing the prices, I'm still able to comfortably absorb any additional tax. And therefore, I'm in a comfortable position to be able to say that I can absorb the cost. But what we've seen, over the years, is most people and most companies will pass it on to the consumer, which is what usually happens because excise is a consumption tax. So there's no advantage of a one manufacturer over another because it will apply across the entire spectrum of products that are being covered in that particular inflation adjustment. Yes, sir.
But to be fair, Lindstrom, when you talk about the annual adjustment is ideally meant to ensure the tax yield then keeps up with the inflation in the market. Taxpayers will tell you pay is not adjusted to ensure that it reflects the trend in inflation. My tax rebates are not adjusted similarly. Yes. Don't you think sometimes we're just pushing the taxpayer a bit too much?
Now, one of the things, and that's very nice, good question. One of the ways to look at it is, for example, when you look at pay as you earn, and some of the other taxes, including VAT. VAT is charged at what we call an ad valorem rate, which means we are charging a percentage of the value. So when we charge a percentage, which is the same thing that is happening with most of the other taxes, is that we are a percentage of the value. So if the value increases, that means we are also able to get more because we are the tax itself is a percentage of that value. So we don't really have a major challenge when it comes to other taxes because when your salary goes up, for example, is that automatically your pay as you earn goes up because it's a percentage of that amount of money that you're earning. So we don't have a challenge with most of the other taxes. The only challenge comes with excise, and not all products, even for excise, is where the tax rate is a specific rate. For ad valorem, we don't have the same challenge. Yes, sir.
I see. Let's wrap up this conversation. We are all waiting for the finance bill with bated breath.
Yes.
And we are just wondering, what really can we expect around the excise? Would you have any high-level thoughts you could give?
Unfortunately, at this time, we may not be able to know what is in the finance bill because we're expecting to see what will happen. The good thing about the bill is the Constitution gives room for public participation, and as we will have an opportunity to be able to look at what exactly has been covered there. We will have an opportunity as Kenyans, as traders, as KRA as well, to give our views on what is in the finance bill. So we're also looking, as KRA, we're also looking forward to see what is there, what is there, and also be able to participate like every other organization, like every other Kenyan, and give our comments on what is in the bill. So we're also really looking forward to seeing what is covered there.
Okay. My final question, Lindstrom, and I'd be remiss if I don't ask you this. There's a lot of talk among industry players around the interpretation of the conservatory orders on the annual adjustment.
Yes.
This matter is in court.
Yes.
I know you're really guarded.
Yes.
Is there anything you can say?
At this particular point, unfortunately, because the matter is still in court, and we have not, we've not gotten a determination of the court as at the moment. So for that one, we still have to wait until we get a determination of the court, after which then we'll be providing public information on what the court has said about that particular issue. So as at now, since we don't have the decision of the court, we may not be able to comment on it.
That takes us to the close of our conversation, where we have been focusing on excise tax in the Kenyan environment, and we're privileged to have Lindstrom Kinoti, the project manager in charge of EGMS in this country. We shall continue to dig into these matters of taxation, especially once the finance bill lands on our desks. Stay tuned to Business Redefined.